Well, I want to say welcome to everybody. This is Kokoro Live. My name is Alex Lang, and I'm here with Jodi Drey. And today we are going to be talking about the concept of education. And Jodi is a close friend of mine. She also is a teacher. And so I've invited her in so that she can give me all the insider info on education. I want to talk a lot about how education functions. I have a lot of thoughts on this, and she does too. And I'm just interested to kind of go down this road because I think for a lot of us in the world today, education is perceived as being one thing, and to me, it's something entirely different. And so that's what I ultimately want to get to, is to talk through that. But to begin, I want to turn it over to Jodi for a second. So Jodi, tell us a little bit about your background. So you're a teacher. How long have you been a teacher, first of all?
This is my 26th year at the same school. And wow. I even did my observations in student teaching there. So I've been at the school for 27 years. But I started out, as I said, doing my student teaching in 5th grade. It was amazing. And there happened to be a teacher retiring that year when I graduated. And I wasn't even going to apply. I was a little bit older than typical. I was 25, and I thought, I want to travel a little bit.
You talk about that like you're like 100 years ago, and it's like she should have gotten married when she was 21. You know, she's too old now.
Too old now. But my cooperating teacher encouraged me, for the experience, go ahead and interview. So I did, got the job, and it turned out to just be my dream job. I absolutely loved it. I loved that age of kids. I found myself really seeing that I kind of had a knack with a little bit, the older kids in the elementary school, which goes up to 5th grade for us. And then my 4th year, which way back then, was you could potentially receive tenure after 4 years. So the way it kind of works, the grade before us, the 4th grade, only had 2 sections. So, and we were 3. So the low man on the totem pole, I was going to be gone. Oh. But my principal, thank goodness, really advocated for me and wanted me to stay. I almost taught PE. I had enough science credits. He said, just teach anything. Yeah. We want to keep you. So I transitioned then from 5th grade to the LRC director, which is the Learning Resource Center, because I had always done things with technology. And so then I was teaching K-5. Wow. As what we call specials. Yeah. So I did that for 4 years, which looking back really was helpful because, especially as a new teacher, but nowadays veteran teachers too, the amount of work, if you really want to do your job well, especially as a classroom teacher, but any kind of teacher or people who work with kids in the educational system, you take a lot of the work home. Yeah. And so people had been saying, why don't you get your master's? Why don't you get your master's? And I thought, there's no way. I'm here at 9 o'clock at night, by my choice, but there was no way. Well, going into the LRC, you don't have the responsibilities of report
LRC
cards.
Stands for?
Learning Resource Center.
Okay.
Yes. So no report cards.
And that's what a special is?
Yes, like music, fine arts, PE, those are specials, what we call specials. Okay. So kids leave, that's usually when the teacher has the planned time. So another teacher teaches them in that specialized area.
So you got to teach that. So it sounds like your administrator, mm-hmm. which I know is it can be a contentious kind of thing sometimes. Your administrator really liked you and was there for you and really helped you out. Is that same administrator still there, or has
he just retired?
Did he? Oh, wow.
The school year before last, yes. Okay. So and he was at our school that whole time.
So who do you work with now? So you work with specials. Let's fast forward to today.
Today I work as the talent development program teacher, which is sometimes referred to as gifted. We have a little different philosophy other than gifted, but I ended up getting my master's in gifted education. So that it happened to be the teacher who was teaching that retired the year I finished my master's. Okay. She's the one who whispered in my ear that I should do it. And then so I was they had to open the role, but it was we knew that I was going to be able to do that. So the inside advantage there. So then this is my 7th to 18th year, I think, doing that.
Okay. So So would it be fair to say that you work with maybe some of the more motivated students? Is that...
I don't know that I would say, I mean, I guess overall maybe more motivated, but sometimes capable, yes. Motivated, not always.
Okay.
Some kids learn very early on when they enter the educational system. If they know the concepts being taught already,
Yeah.
they learn really bad habits. They learn how to not learn because they are not being challenged. So then they can tune out because they know things already and they're not getting anything that different from what the teacher's giving. So they can flow, and then they kind of learn excuse me, some bad habits because they can do everything without having to be taught it.
So and that's something actually I want to dive into it in a moment. And, you know, for anybody who might be watching, if you're on, you know, the question that I want to pose to you is, you know, what has been your experience with the educational system, either for yourself or maybe you have children and your children are going through it right now. I would be interested to know what it is that your experience has been like, because I think that, you know, what we went through when we were growing up, it's so different today. I've been kind of surprised by how different it is in many ways. And so I guess one thing that I would ask you, because, you know, every teacher kind of has their own kind of world that they live in. Would you agree? Like, you know, like, you know, the classroom is like your place where you can make an impact on these kids. And sometimes if, you know, I would assume for a year, or maybe if you're lucky, you maybe get them for multiple years.
I do.
So you get to have that impact over time, right? Which is I think an even better thing, which again is something I want to come back to. But what I'm interested to know from your perspective right now, where we are in the United States today, 2025, what do you think we're doing right for education for our children right now? What do you think we got right, maybe even compared to how we grew up?
Right. I think there's been a transition, particularly in the area of math, but more overall, to really help students understand the why behind what they're learning. So just using math as an example, there's a real push to move from the concrete to the then conceptual and then the abstract. So for kids learning how to multiply, you know, we start with them using tools to build arrays and see what that looks like before they even learn what we call the standard algorithm, where they know kind of the rules of this times this equals this, or formulas or things like that. So really building that deep understanding. And even as a person who teaches math to kids who are ready for more challenging math, I find myself as I'm teaching wishing that I had been taught the way that we're teaching.
Why is it the case? Because, you know, my remembrance of multiplication was flashcards.
Oh, right.
That was what it was. And you just memorized it.
Right.
And if you did it, you got it. If you didn't, well, that's tough luck. And then, you know, you move on with that.
Right.
So, I mean, I remember we had a game that we would play. And I don't know if you ever did this with your kids, or when you were a kid, where basically there was, you know, two kids would get up, and then it was the first to answer.
Oh, right.
The one would sit down and move around the classroom, right? And there was this one kid in our class, Matthew Tix. I remember him. He actually moved away.
Matthew, if you're listening.
Yeah, he was so good. He was so fast, and nobody could keep up with him. And I remember I bested him once. One time it was such a big deal, but never again. I think he remembered that. He was like, no, we're
not going to happen again.
So, but that's what that is like how I remember multiplication is just bam, like you got to just do it and just memorize it. Right. So what's the difference between I memorized 3 times 3 is 9 and the way you're teaching it now?
So and this hasn't been communicated probably as well to families, or if it has, it's maybe at too high a level with all the new standards, but that still is important. We can call that automaticity or fluency, but not really until later. Whereas it used to be kind of 3rd grade was the big year to learn your multiplication.
Yep.
Now kids are introduced to it. They're expected to be able to compute factors to make products, but they don't have to do it that way or that fast. So really we want the kids to be able to understand, what does that mean, 3 times 3? Well, it means 3 groups of 3. So then later when they get into multiplying bigger numbers, they're able to pull numbers apart and multiply them in different ways. They have it's called the box method, where they can split apart the factors. If it's 34 times 59, they can pull it apart to 30 and 4, and then 30 times 4, 30 times 50.
Right,
so
right.
it kind of breaks it all apart so they can see what's happening and why multiplication works the way it does.
Okay.
Now, there's going to come a point when they can't use that method. It's just not efficient. But the thought behind it, the philosophy behind it is, we really want the kids to understand what multiplication means, what division means. Something real simple, kids will be taught, and even now, I mean, I find myself slipping up sometimes. Whenever you divide, you're going to get a smaller number. Well, that's not true always. Once you introduce fractions and decimals and all that, or signed numbers, that doesn't always tend to be the case. So if we just go through the rules and they don't know why they're doing what they're doing, first of all, they're not really learning.
They're
memorizing. And then the application of that won't be as effective.
So you're getting at something here that I think is really kind of interesting, which is this idea in education, which I think has been around for a time memoriam, like at least since the American education system has been in place, which is that the rewards for the smartest students, the best students, the A's, let's put it that way, right? You get an A, is the ability to regurgitate information quickly and efficiently. So, if I'm on a test, 3 times 3 is 9, I get that right, bam, done, right? Like you've demonstrated that you as the teacher, you taught something, I can then show you that I can replicate that. Right?
Kind of input, output.
Input, output.
Yeah.
Right. So the interesting thing, though, is that is, in many ways, a test of how much can I just mimic
Oh, gosh, yeah.
what you're doing. And the mimickers, the people who can mimic best, they're the ones who succeed most in the school system as we have it. So this brings me to my other question. So you brought up what, if I'm understanding what you're saying, a good thing is that we've changed the system in such a way that now we care a lot more about comprehension.
Yes.
So not just can you do the thing, but do you understand why we're doing it? Do you understand kind of fundamentally how it works and how this could be applied to other parts of your life?
Right. Yes.
So application matters. So if you were to then turn this around and ask the question, or I ask you the question, what is the negative aspect of our education system? And again, I'm going to ask if anybody's there to basically, if you've had a positive or negative experience, whatever that is, if you'd like to write it into the chat. I'm very interested to know anything that might be going on with you in terms of how you were educated, things that did work well for you, things that didn't work well, and maybe what's happening if you have kids and things that you want to know about. Okay, so back to you in terms of what do you think we're doing wrong?
Can I go big picture?
Go big picture, sure.
I think as an educational system for our country, I think the way we fund education is flawed. Mm-hmm. So I was able to do part of my master's program in Australia, in New South Wales, and we went and visited a bunch of different schools and learned, and when we told them that our schools are funded by by property taxes, they couldn't believe it. They were, what? Why? And the way they do it is they still pay taxes, but it all goes to the government, and then the government divides everything equally. So no matter where you live, you get the same. It's all standardized.
Yeah.
Everybody gets a computer lab. Whatever it is. And then if parents, just like PTOs that we have now, if they want to do something a little extra, they can do that. But the standard is a lot higher than what we have for our kids. So I think we really need to relook at funding.
So this is an interesting question. And historically, why did that happen? Why did we go down the road of of using our property taxes to do it. Systemically, it was done because it was a way of segregating.
Right. Yeah.
Because if you live in a nice area, right? Like basically you can sit there, and that's why people get so concerned about what district are you in.
Yes.
Because that's where, if I can keep the dollars in this particular district, and then the person who lives a town over who can't afford to live in that area, now they're dealing with less dollars, and it goes on down the road.
Correct.
So I think that if I may speak openly, I really think that that's a vestige of racism and prejudice and discrimination in our country. And I agree with you. I think that it would be much easier if everybody just said, hey, if your school has this many kids, you just get this much money
per
student. Like that's how it goes, right?
Right.
Which would be much, much better. But this is obviously not how we function and how we work. So if you could do it, it sounds like you would do it the Australian way.
Yes.
Yep. And make sure that everybody had at least equal access to resources.
Yes.
At the very
least. Right. Because education is supposed to be the great equalizer.
Yeah.
And because we know not all students have the same opportunities outside of school, I strongly feel that it is our role to help level the playing field with those opportunities. I think that's kind of where the idea of field trips came in. Let's take everybody to a place where we can all learn together. Maybe this kid goes to the museum every week, but this kid's never been in their whole life. That's huge. Yeah. That's really huge.
Yeah. Yeah. And, what's interesting about education, when we think about it, right? And I think this kind of gets into a larger philosophical question about it, which is there's all kinds of different ways to be educated. We started off by talking about math, right? Which is our country is falling way behind in terms of our math proficiency, way far behind. Now, you could argue on some level, does it matter as much when you have computers doing so much for you? But fundamentally, I do think it's generally not a good thing.
No,
right?
Not a good thing.
Not a good thing generally. So we started there, but then you moved on, and that was interesting. You brought up the concept of a field trip, and how a field trip can. It's an experience, an experiential learning, right? By going out and seeing these things and getting exposed to something that you wouldn't have otherwise been exposed to. So, in your experience, you only get to do that. I mean, how many field trips do you get to take a year?
I mean, probably 2, maybe 3, but we're very lucky where I am.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the norm.
So maybe if they're lucky, one a year,
right?
That you get to take.
Right.
So, in your mind, and in your teaching life, where do you rank the? I'm going to sit here on the board and explain this thing to you, versus experiential learning.
Oh gosh, there's experiential learning is what it's all about. In terms of really getting the kids to learn it. Yeah. I mean, usually it's something they're interested in, even if they don't know it until they get there. It's hands-on, you're up and moving around. Yeah. So there's all those aspects that really can allow kids to have the best environment for learning. I mean, we are really moving toward, I know in where I teach for sure, but I think as a common philosophy, away from the lecture, at least in K-5, I don't know, or K-8, I don't know about later in high school, although perhaps at college, I don't know, but really trying to get the kids up and moving and, looking at all the statistics about kids or people tune out after, I can't remember the number, but it's such a short period of time. Nice. So really just getting them up and moving around and engaged, and that's something, especially since the pandemic, we've really noticed that kids need that much more than I've ever seen before. It was probably always good. I'm sure it was always good for them. Now they need it.
Yeah.
If you're not getting them up and moving.
Well, and this brings up a very interesting question to me about how people, the system that we've developed. So, it wasn't until really the 20th century that we buckled down and we said, okay, we want to make sure that everybody in the United States gets an education. Now, the question is, why did they do that? Like, why did they make that decision? Well, what they noticed was that we were moving from, like, people were starting to flood into urban areas, and they were starting to work in industry. And many of these people, early on it was move this thing, place this widget here, right? But as things got more complex, and Ford, I think, is a great example of this. So Ford creates his assembly line, right? And he paid those people $5 a day, the people who worked for him. Like an enormous amount of money at the time.
Right.
And the reason he did that is because he wanted them to be loyal to him, and he wanted the very best people. And eventually, other people were like, whoa, he is making this great product that everybody wants. How is he doing it? And they realized he's paying a lot. But then, you realize that so more and more industries pop up that are sucking up all the people who know everything. And they're going to the government, they're saying, we don't have people who know how to do basic math. We don't know people who know basic writing. And this is impeding our ability to run our industries now, because this is becoming more important. It's not just, can you weave the thing in the loom, right? Now it's much greater. So the government comes in and says, okay, yeah, you're right. Like, if we're going to have a workforce that is really going to propel itself forward, then we need to educate our public, right? We need to make sure. This is kind of the impetus for public education, which is primarily economic.
Right.
So the reason why you get educated is because they want you to have a job to contribute to the economy.
Correct.
So, and I brought this up with you a few days ago when we were kind of talking about this, but you and I, so we have two people who are two little, I guess they're not little anymore. They're about to go to high school. Yeah, so we went to the high school orientation. And I wanted to know your thoughts, because I think I was very impressed with what they put together. But a big part of it was the educational lineup was to help them figure out what they want to do in their career going forward. Now, I'm interested to know, aside from our conversation prior to when we talked about it, what was your thought around that? Like, when you saw it?
Oh, I thought it was incredible. I thought, they get to take this pathway with their interest is a huge thing, right?
Yeah.
That's a motivation. As we were talking about motivation before. So, oh my goodness, they're going to get to take classes in an area of their interest, and it's this pathway that could help direct them where they might want to go post high school.
Yes.
So I was and the fact that they could switch if it wasn't, working for them. So I was all for it, all positive, really was only thinking of it through that lens.
And I was really impressed with it too. I mean, when we were growing up, like, talk about like a career, it was like that, you just took the classes and did the stuff.
So they hand you the book. Was it What Color Is Your Parachute or something, some book, and like, figure out what might be good for you.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, and like, you have teachers whispering to you, right? Don't do this.
Right. But everything was pretty much standardized.
It was.
The classes,
Yeah, like you did it. And I think that this is an interesting thing, right? So, I could see it happen in my school. So my school was, we had a number of people who were very well off. And we also had a number of people who lived in poverty.
Mm-hmm. Same.
And what was interesting was, as I got older, you could see it in the early grades, where it kind of, it was definitely segregated out by how smart you were. And by the time you got to high school, you saw more and more people kind of checking out, because they've been slotted early on. It had kind of been determined by the time they were going to high school, you're going to take this path.
Yes.
And
tracking.
Just like like we're tracking you through this.
Right.
And you had to fight if you wanted to be kind of on a different track, because they assumed you weren't going to do it. Now, I think the problem is, right, so when we were in school, what ended up happening, you would take, let's just say, I remember this very clearly. So, you get to your biology class. Mm-hmm. So you sit down and you take biology. And I think the idea behind it, tell me if I'm wrong, but the idea when we were growing up is expose them to everything. And then maybe you do fall in love with science. Mm-hmm. And maybe you do love biology. And maybe you do want to do something in that field. And that'll be great for you, right? But if you didn't fall in love with it, or it wasn't meaningful to you,
or your teacher wasn't
very good.
That was like a one-shot thing.
Yeah. And then you come out and you're like, well,
Not for me.
Not for me. I'm moving on, right? I'm not.
Right.
This isn't going to be for me. And you were never really told why you were doing it. You just, this is
It
part
was
of
the class you had to take.
It was, it's just part of your, you have to have 4 science credits,
Exactly.
right? So go through and you're going to take this science class. And you were never told what's the purpose behind it. Now, I know now the purpose behind it was to create, they're trying to expose you to everything so that you can eventually find this career path in something, right? Something that you're going to do. So what this does, though, is that if you're the kind of person who doesn't resonate with school, if you're the kind of person who you go in and you have trouble sitting there, taking notes,
right,
listening, being compliant to whatever the rules are. And, my dad always used to say, he goes, I never understood why, he goes, school always felt like the biggest waste of time because I could be out working.
Oh, wow.
He's like, it was just preventing me. He's like, I knew I had to do it, but he's like, I already knew what I wanted to do, and I just wanted to do that thing. And I didn't need to learn all the other stuff. And I think that's a very common thing, like to have to sit there and to go through all this. It's just kind of, I think a lot of people are just waiting it out.
Yes.
Now, you're not dealing necessarily with those students in the same way who are, but like you grew up, I'm sure, watching people who...
Oh, for sure.
They were like, can we just time it out? Or they left.
Right.
Entirely. They were just like, they got to a certain point, 10th. I mean, I remember our class, we didn't have a very big school to begin with, but like you start to watch people just being like, well, I don't need this anymore, and walk away. So the question becomes, when you look at it from the perspective of why the government is doing it, they want you to be educated so that you can get a job. And if you didn't get through your education, well, what are you slotted into? Normally, you're pretty much slotted into menial work, or at least that's what they would say. That's not necessarily true. You could be an incredible business person.
Oh, right.
And come up with amazing business ideas that have nothing to do with education. You could just come up with something. Like one of the most wealthy people I ever came across from, I think when I was in school, he sells cardboard.
Oh, wow.
Literally, he sells and recycles cardboard. And it's a multi-million-dollar business, and he makes huge amounts of money off of that. And did he have to go to school for that? Not really. He wasn't very good at math either, but he has an accountant who takes care of it. All he has to do is facilitate the relationships. So on the one hand, it's true that when you get to, in order to go to college, you do need education, right?
Right.
But how many, today even, when you go to college, what's the purpose of college? Like when you go, is the goal, I assume, right? You go to college, I assume you went to college to learn how to become a teacher, yes?
Eventually, yes.
Yes.
After community college, but yes.
But how many people did you meet who went to college who ended up doing nothing about what they learned?
Right.
Like so many.
A lot.
Like the vast majority, right?
Yes.
So again...
Even more common now, I think, than... Or within the last 10 years than when I went to school.
Oh, yeah. No, and I think more and more... I remember I had an econ professor in college, and he said to me, he said something that just blew me away, and I was like, I've been thinking about it ever since. He goes, so you guys will eventually graduate. He's like, hopefully. And and when you get out, you will have this piece of paper that essentially says you went to Rice University. Now, all it tells the person who's hiring you is that you put resources towards this degree. You maybe learned nothing on your way through. You might not have, even if you have straight A's, you might not retain any of that information. All it says is, it says 2 things to an employer. You put resources towards an education, and you had the wherewithal to be able to get through all the classes, so you were able to organize yourself, to slot out your time appropriately. That's all it says to an employer. Whether yes, if you're going to be an engineer, you do have to do engineering.
Sure,
right?
sure.
Like there are some things you do need to know in some jobs, obviously. But I would say on the whole, that's probably not true, yes?
The other thing, just to go back to that whole point of the government's idea of education was to produce workers. And I don't know how much that has shifted. I don't know that it's as overt, but what happened to going to school to learn how to learn?
Okay, yes.
And to and I think I'm sure that gets more challenging as teachers of high school students and beyond. But that's one of the things I think as an elementary school teacher, we have that love of learning in us. Not saying others don't, and that we are communicating that through what we teach them. But I think as we get higher in the grades, that fizzles out. Creativity.
So why does that happen? Because I think that's a really interesting thing.
And I do see even some of that in elementary now. And I know some of my colleagues would say, for sure, that there's no time in the schedule for creativity or fun things anymore. And I think it's because, if you look at, you mentioned it with math, but, reading, kids are not reading on grade level, sometimes 2 to 3 years behind grade level. So I think the districts feel a responsibility. That's where our focus needs to be. Kids have to know how to read to be able to do anything else. So that's where the focus becomes, and then everything else takes second to learning how to read. And if so, any of the creative things, maybe they can write in a creative way, but we're kind of going back to our district adopted a curriculum that seems to be, it's only our second year, so it seems to be working well, but it's very structured, and we have pacing guides, same thing for math. So teachers feel that pressure to stay, if the kids don't understand it, we got to keep moving on.
Sorry, Billy, you just never.
You'll get it next year.
That's right. Let's hope.
But I think that idea, there was a trend several years back called the Genius Hour, and schools were really trying to reserve an hour of time every Friday or something, where sometimes they still do, it's called Fun Fridays, and the kids get to do something of their choice. And if you would really sit down and talk to those teachers, the kids are fully engaged, they are learning about something that they're interested in, and they could start to see things in their students that they don't see on their typical math work or reading or social science or whatever it is, because they've got that investment. So that whole idea of learning because for your own self-worth, self-discovery, because you want to learn.
So okay, and I agree with you. I want to talk about that, because that's of course, I feel like in some ways that's put out there as a dream.
It is,
right? Like,
yes.
That I became a teacher because I want to inspire kids to learn. I hear that from teachers so often, right?
Yes.
I want to inspire them to learn.
Yes.
But I think the problem is that you're working in a system that isn't really designed for that.
No.
Like, you're working in a system that's designed to, you're giving them the skills so that they can be a part of the labor force.
Correct.
Period.
Yep.
Like, really, there's like, sure, you can put like little sprinkles on top of it, right?
Like
if you want to add a little bit of pixie dust in there,
glitter there to it.
But truthfully, if you cannot make them they would, I think literally, if the government came in and sat down and said, have you made them a productive member of society, or have you made a little contribution to that? That's your job,
right?
Is to get them out there so they can be that. Now, I think that we know your job is much greater than that. That your job as a teacher is to, you're bringing, so a kid comes to you, they bring a whole life with them into that room, and that life may not allow them to be in a place where they can learn,
right?
And you're having to break through, you're not just doing this with one student, you're doing it with dozens, sometimes some teachers doing it with hundreds of students. It just depends on where you're teaching, right? And you're trying to find little fissures, little cracks in each of them. And to me, I see that as, oh wow, that's so hard to do that. Not only are you, because you've been handed this thing of teach this, so that's your primary job,
right?
But then secondarily, you have this, you got into it because you want to inspire, right? You want, and I feel like they're not setting you up for success in that way. So if it were up to you, let's say you could wave a magic wand and you could redo the education system so that you had the opportunity to have those moments with each of the students you came across, what would you do differently, do you think?
Oh gosh.
Would it be Genius Hours every day, or what do you think?
I mean, ideally, you could have integrated units that, one major theme and then everything fell under that, so kids could see how everything was connected. There's that purpose or meaning behind it. There would be a lot more interest-based. So, let's say you all have to learn X. Well, you can each decide kind of what interest you have, but that will allow you to learn that X and apply it to that. But we tried that in our district, something similar, and what we quickly found was that, which we knew anyway, but if the kids don't have the foundation, it's really hard to get them to have something so open.
Yeah.
So I guess if I really could change one thing, I don't think this would be the ideal, but if I could change one thing, it would be to incorporate more creativity. I remember somebody introduced me to, if I get his name right, Dr. Ken Robinson? I'm not sure that's it. But he did a TED Talk and just talking about how schools have destroyed creativity. And I think with the push, especially, starting with the No Child Left Behind in the federal government, it was all about the testing. And so we're really lucky in our district that we don't quote unquote teach to the test, but for a lot of folks, those stakes are so high, the outcomes of those tests. And I think tests have their place, for sure. But when you build everything around that, and then that kind of goes back to what we were talking about before about the memorization and you just have to know how to do it like this way, because this is what the test is, how the test will test you. Not we're learning to learn, and hey, the test will result in whatever it is because of what you've learned.
Right. So what is, define creativity for me for a second, because I think that's an interesting, you're saying I wish I had more time to teach or allow them to be creative. So what does that mean to you? So
there's 4 areas of creativity, but technically, but it's an opportunity for kids to be flexible with their thinking, to be able to explore kind of topics that are related. So there's kind of to take one thing and see how it could be changed a little bit. There's original thinking, or originality. Mm-hmm. What can you come up with based on this, set of criteria or constraints? What can you come up with? Whether it's artistic or not, it could be kind of like we're trying to do a little bit more with math. Like, can you figure out a way to solve this that's not just the standard, the way we were taught? How do you see this? Those multiple perspectives of things. And then just being able
encouraging that.
And encouraging that and valuing it.
Yeah, because I think to me, that's something that when I was growing up, I always remember I would get to it on tests oftentimes. Like I remember mathematics. It's always, I wonder if I have like dyslexia with math, because for me, I would always have to do things, in a roundabout way. I'd get to the answer, but it would take me forever to kind of do it and to get to where I wanted to be. And, so on a test, it doesn't matter. You just answer the questions, right? But what I did notice was, at least in high school, when you veered too much, at least when we were growing up, that was not encouraged.
Not encouraged.
Yeah, because if you veered too much from the way it was supposed to be done,
right,
then even if you came at it from a different perspective and you still got to the same place, it was like, nope, we do it this way.
This way, exactly. And I think that's, being a teacher, you have incredible power and responsibility, but that power to, as a kid, you were talking, a kid comes in your room that morning, we have that power as one person to either make their day or break their day. The way we could say one thing could totally set them up to have an amazing day learning, or nope, shutting down. And so when you talk about being able, so I think there's like almost the power that comes along with that can also lead into, it's my way. Nope, right. I taught you this way, it's my way, you didn't do it this way. That can so turn a kid off. Yeah. And I mean, one of the things that I tell my students this all the time, I love when they teach me something, and it comes often a lot in math. They can think of things much faster and in unique ways than I can, but also if we're reading a book together and they see something from a perspective that never entered my mind as an adult reading this book, never even thought of it. that is the
like
gold.
the best.
Like
Yeah.
that is just, and I make a big deal of it because back to too, like the purpose of learning. So if we're asking kids to do things and only think about it this particular way, or in my class, if you don't write your name, in these 4 lines and everything like this, I'm not accepting your paper. And while we have to teach kids that there are rules and but come on, we can be a little flexible. If a kid's got things they want to show, if they want to express their learning, we've got to be able to look at, allow them to express that in different ways. And there's so many theories in education that have now kind of become a little speculated. Multiple intelligence is one. That, we don't maybe have like a kinesthetic intelligence and, different intelligences. But I think moving too far away from that can cause us to have the kids conform too much. And then we just go back to assembly line.
Well, so it's interesting, something that I wanted to dive into with you, because I think this is, when I was growing up, I was naturally pretty good for a while. I didn't have to work too much. I could memorize, you remember you had spelling tests constantly, right? And I would generally do fairly well on those. I even got I remember, was it 3rd or 4th grade, something like that? I think it was 4th grade. I got into I got to the regional spelling bee, which was a big deal.
That is a big deal.
So anyways, it was really cool to be able to make it to that. But then 5th, 6th, 7th, I did okay. But the truth is that once I got to 8th and 9th, things, they start to turn the heat up, and you can't just not read and not do the stuff anymore. And I didn't really have the work ethic at that point to do it, because it had all mostly come naturally to me. And so the idea that I had to work hard at school or to work at it to learn it, I was like, well, if I can't learn it just immediately, it's probably not worth my time, right? And so probably I would say through most 8th, 9th, 10th grade, I was a B, C student. I got an A here and there, depending on what it was. But I started dropping down. I had been in the advanced classes, and I started having to drop back. And in some ways, it was really it was like a hit to my ego. But my goodness, it was really fascinating. I remember I dropped down to regular, it was your standard English class.
Right. Okay.
In 10th grade. And it was, for me, I love that class. First of all, I went from being the dumbest kid in the smart class to the smartest kid in the normal class, right? And so she was like, oh, this is great. And so because I would actually read it, and I was like, oh, this is really fascinating. And she gave us amazing, I still remember many of the stories that we read from that year. And so, it was at a slower pace. It wasn't grinding you into the ground with all these things and making it super hard on you. It was more well, what do you think about this? It was more kind of like that. And there was a pleasure in that I was like, oh, that's interesting. But that year I took Latin in high school. So I was not good at it. Oh, no. But I stayed with it all 5 years. So high school for us began in 8th grade. So you could do 5 years of a language. Wow. So when there was one Latin teacher, and her name was Mrs. Merrill, and she had very she was very high standards. So the way it worked was, at the beginning of the year, you filled out a note card, with your name on it, and she would shuffle the cards, and you would come in from your homework, and it had to be memorized. You had to read your answer, you had to read the Latin off of, it was a transparency.
Oh, yes.
No PowerPoints.
No, digital cameras. No.
So you had to read it off the screen from memory. So you couldn't just sit there with your notes of what you had translated. You had to know it. And, it was kind of she shuffled the cards, and if you came up, and then she would deduct points based on the mistakes you made. So, because you would read it, that was one part of it. And so you would screw that up, or I would usually. Other students did very well. And then she would ask you, okay, so what is this part of speech for this word? What is happening here? So then you get quizzed on that. That's every day. My stress dreams are about Latin. I will tell you.
Still to this day.
Still to this day. If I'm super stressed, I will be no. My dream is I didn't do my homework.
Oh, no.
And I'm I'm
Those
like,
are the
oh, this is
worst.
gonna be rough. I gotta but that was like, and that was like that every day for 5 years, where you just had to, it was just a constant thing. But what was interesting was that the first 2 years is grammar. Mm-hmm. The third year, you get to do the real Latin. And the first thing you do is you do Cicero. And Cicero was this lawyer who was basically, it was kind of like right before the Roman Republic fell and became the Roman Empire. And he had this very famous speech he gave called the Catiline Address, which was done extemporaneously. So he got up and, and they have scribes there who, of course, write this down. This is why we have it. So, and he gave this speech. And so what we did, we spent the first semester translating this entire speech. And it was hard. Because, this is like a full-grown man who's a lawyer who's speaking and doing all these things. So you went from like, the king runs over the wall to this, right? So now you're jumping into it. And it was like, I remember reading the first few sentences. I was like, I don't know if I can do this. Like, this is really hard. But, we slowly came around. The second half of the year, we started reading Cicero's philosophy. Because what happens is he ends up getting exiled. And in exile, he writes all these letters to his friend. And in those letters, he's contemplating life and philosophy. So we get to this. And what we would do in these classes is we'd read a section of the letter. And then she'd say, what do you think about this? So we'd probably spend 30 minutes talking, 30 minutes translating, 20 minutes talking about life.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, whoa, this was the first time in my life that I was like, school is amazing. Because we got to talk about things that I thought were just fantastic and amazing. And we got to one of his letters where he talked about learning. And I remember, getting up. We got to this point, and basically, he has this point where he's like, you learn for the sake of learning, that is the reward in and of itself.
That's the reward, right?
Now, what she did in that moment was, I remember she didn't look at me, but she looked at all the kids, all the other kids.
Everybody but you.
But there's a reason for that. Okay. Why she was talking to all of them. She basically, and it's the only time, because these are the smartest kids in our class. Like, everybody who's in Latin, you are the smartest person probably in the class. So we had 12 or 13 people in there. Those are like the top, those are like 1 to 12 pretty much in our class besides me. So I remember she looked at them and she said, you guys come in here and you study and you take this test and you ace it. You ace my tests every single time. And she goes, but when you do, all you're doing is you're just doing it to get a grade. And she's like, you're missing the entire point of why you're here. And I remember it was like astonishing. I've never, because those were the kids who were like, oh, all the teachers are like, you're the greatest.
Right.
Everybody. But now, she was taking them to task and saying everything, sure, you're going to get A's. But to what end?
Yeah.
What's the point? And I remember that stuck with me so deeply. The idea that, I remember walking out of the class and I was buzzing. And I remember turning to my friend Chen, and I was like, that was crazy. Just hearing, it really changed my perspective. And so over the summer, remember, I've been that BC student pretty much. Over the summer, so I had going into my junior year, start of junior year, I had a 3.1. 9.5, something like that. It was almost a 3.2 or 3.175, something like that. But I made the decision over the summer. I was like, you know what? I don't care about the grade anymore. I don't. I'm just going to learn. If all knowledge is valuable, I'll just learn the knowledge. And if I get a good grade, fantastic.
Right.
If I don't really care, because the knowledge is really what it's about. I completely shifted my perspective. So I just was I just don't even care about the grade.
Wow.
And when you know it, because all of a sudden I cared only about just learning. Well, I did so much better on the tests, right? And so I went in 1 year. I went from a 3.1, whatever it was, 3.195, and I just barely broke over a 3.505,
wow.
Which was what allowed me to get into National Honor Society. So in 1 year, I made up for 3 years of really doing poorly. But the reason I bring this up is because that slight shift in mentality, where I said all knowledge is valuable, that completely changed my life.
Imagine if we started that way.
Right. No, well, and you see, that's the interesting thing is I didn't understand why I was there.
Right.
Like, what am I doing?
Because you had to take a language.
Yeah, I had to take a language.
Right.
I had to be in school. Like, nobody was telling me why. And I'm the type of person where I want to understand why. I just don't want to. And the way we grew up, and I don't know if you grew up this way, but I can tell you, my family was never big on telling me why we were doing
because
anything.
I said so.
Yeah, that's right. yeah. Like, why was never part of.
And now I, as a parent, am way on the other, probably too far.
I'm gonna explain to you why. And they're just like,
they're like, I don't care. This is yes or no.
But it was this fundamental shift, and so to me. Right, I remember when I got to, so that was enough for me to do well enough to ultimately get into Rice with my swimming.
Oh, wow.
Because, that's the shift that it took, because without that, I wouldn't have gotten into Rice.
How much that changed. But you also were able, that speaks a lot to you, too, because you didn't just apply it to Latin. You applied that to everything all your subjects. So that's really... That's really neat.
But I remember I actually called Ms. Merrill up at one point. And
I'm so glad.
It was actually when I got this job, because one of the things we had to do after we did Cicero was we had to write and memorize a speech that we gave in Latin to and we had to write a persuasive speech, but it was fully memorized top to bottom. So,
man.
So, I told her, I wrote to her and I said, it's fascinating, everything that I learned, because, I was a pastor. And everything that, Jesus' whole time period is the Roman Empire. It's all the stuff I learned in her class. Everything I learned was actually very, very important for what I ended up doing. And I wrote to her and I said, look, not only did the stuff I learned from you, is that something I use in my professional life all the time, but that speech that I gave, right? I do that now every week, where I write a sermon and I memorize it top to bottom. And I'm like, but that's where it all started, was right there. So I told her the thing about the knowledge. I was like, how much that changed me. And she goes, I think you might be the only one.
But you know what? For her, that's enough.
Oh, no, I know.
My gosh,
yeah.
but maybe just no one else has told her.
Yeah, right. But isn't that interesting? And that made me reflect and think to myself, I think most people think of knowledge, because of the way we're set up with it, as something that really is just for the purpose of, if it's not for a grade, it's for a job. You learn the information, so I get a good grade in your class, so then I can graduate, so I can get a job, so I can earn money.
Right.
It's
kind of all external utility.
Yeah.
It's not an internal reason.
Yeah. But see, that's the thing. So when you say, when you say, how would I change things, right? And I could give them more creativity, which I love that. I think that's a beautiful answer. To me, what I think of, because you're talking about practical application, right? And how great is it? I think Socrates, he believed that all people are natural philosophers within themselves. That everybody is kind of a philosopher, a thinker of life. The question is, how suppressed is it? And I think if you give kids in particular a chance to reflect on their lives, you have to start doing it early, where they can talk why does this happen in the world? What's your thoughts about, ideas of, we could be about just about anything.
Right.
But the truth is particularly things about ethics. I think those are very interesting. How would you deal with this situation? Why would you deal with this way? What's your way of thinking through it? Those are things that, to me, that was life-changing for me to sit there and to have those conversations, because to me, I thought, oh, this is like real life. This matters. And I asked my peers about it, and they loved the conversation because they didn't have to do anything else. That was why they liked it. But for them, I remember, and then I want to get your opinion on this, but I remember talking to them, to me, when I come up with a concept of how to live, if I think through it and I say, okay, I need to live this way, because this is the right or the ethical or you could say moral approach to it. I do that. And I remember I talked to a friend of mine, we just got back from our freshman year of college, and we were talking, and I said, we were talking about school, and I was like, she goes, did you ever, because I never partied or did anything, I never drank. And she said, did you ever go to any parties? And I was like, no, I didn't do that. I was like, it's something I just don't see. Like, I don't want to do that. At the time, I was very kind of morally judgmental about it, but I kind of said to her that no, it's not something that I really want to do. I was like, and I said, that dare education that we got in the 80s was really effective. where I did
the egg is frying.
And she goes, oh yeah, I mean, we all, like, most of us saw that, but like none of us really believed it. I think she goes, I think you're the only one. And it made me realize, I was like, actually, for me, I realized that the reason I love those talks about life so much are because I really want to live them out. So if I have this conversation with you, right, or I have a conversation with anyone about something and it really kind of impacts me, oh my gosh, that's really interesting, I will often integrate that into the way I live. It's not just a philosophical exercise of, oh, this is fun, right? Like, it has real impact on your life.
Right.
But I find most people don't work that way.
No.
That most people, that they're not thinking, like, you have a conversation with your kids, right? I think it's an interesting thing to go from that conversation to a practical output in your life of, okay, we're going to take this thing and we're going to do it. So you said you cared about the whales, right? So now let's go do something for the whales, or let's move this into your life of, you're going to care not just about the whales, but about all things, right? So it's like you start to like try to push this out into other areas. I don't know if a lot of people, even really intelligent people, think that way, because it's just not necessarily part of who they are. But to me, that's why learning is so important, because you can integrate so much of that into your being.
Right, but I think, maybe it could be who they are, but because of how our education system works, there's not that focus necessarily on, reflecting on your thinking, reflecting on what you're doing, metacognition, thinking about what you're thinking. And that's why I think, too, that creativity piece, that flexible thinking, because that can apply to, if you can think about an object in 5 different ways, then you can be more open to, hey, tell me, what's your view on this? And you can be open to listening. And then that has value just for society and for yourself as a human.
So it seems to me like, so it's almost like what we're coming to with this is that creativity, it's almost, and I would put it this way. I would say, yes, teach creativity, but I would say what you want to teach people, in my opinion, whether at any level, is you want to teach them how to think.
How to think, yes, exactly.
Right?
Yep.
Because I think there's a difference. Like,
there is a difference.
When we started earlier, we said, oh, it's mimicking.
Yes.
So if I can regurgitate stuff on a test, that's not thinking.
No.
That's, I can draw on the well of, possible answers you've given to me, and then I can say, this is the one. And I pop it up on the board. Oh, you're so good. Good job, Alex. You did it.
And that word you use, mimic, it's something the team that I work with is getting some professional development in math this year. And we typically, as specialists, don't get the same professional development as the classroom teachers do. And so we're getting it in math, and this the person who's helping us, who works for our district, we went through a whole lesson on mimicking, and she used that whole word. And I had never thought about it in that way before, but that's exactly how I learned to do math. I was mimicking. Yeah. And so that gives me a little bit of hope that, okay, that's out there now. Yeah. Teachers are learning that that's what kids have been doing, and how do we need to shift that? Now, even as educators, we need to then take that into all of the other subjects we teach too, and make sure it's not siloed just into math. We don't want them to mimic in math, but we don't want them to mimic anywhere.
Right. You want them to be a thinker. And that skill right there, I think more than anything else, if you can leave school a thinker, you have achieved something remarkable.
Well, and do we have a sec just to...
Please. Yeah.
So we have this ability to, this opportunity to go into, because the students I teach start in 3rd grade, but we get to go into the 2nd grade classes and teach critical thinking skills. So we have 3 different little mini units that we do. And a teammate of mine this year said that we always talk about how much, the kids love when we come in and they get so excited and they're really engaged, and we're in there for 30 minutes, once a week. But in talking with my teammates, one of them said, well, I think one of the reasons is because we're coming in to teach them how to think. And there's no subject connected with that. Yeah. We're not teaching them how to think in math. We're not teaching them. So they don't have that however they feel. You know, kids have certain way. I'm not good at math. So if we were to come in like, I'm going to teach you how to think in math today. Those kids who think they're not good at math, off.
Yeah.
But thinking is available to everyone.
Yeah.
And we do this because we're trying to level that playing field of giving kids opportunities to learn how to think that maybe they're not as exposed to by their parents or their current environment.
And if you can give that to them, it's the same way where it's like you learn for the sake of learning. Well, maybe I'm not good at math.
Right.
But
if I know how to think.
Right, then I can figure my way through it well enough. And yes, I'm probably not going to be a professional mathematician, but that's okay.
That's okay.
You know, it's all right to... And so I think that that's a beautiful thing. I hope, and I just want you to know, first of all, thank you for being in the education system and caring about that. Because I think that matters. And I think the other thing that I look at Mrs. Merrill, I think one of the reasons why she was so impactful on my life is because I had her for 5 years. You know, the same teacher for 5 years, which had its drawbacks because it was like really stressful.
Right.
But what she gave over those 5 years, how she could mold and form people over those years.
And how she came to know you, I bet.
Yeah, oh yeah,
you know?
Absolutely. That makes a difference. And so the fact that you have students over years, that's
really special.
And that's really what makes thinking possible. And you have to have that time with somebody to make that happen. And that was kind of the beauty. Ultimately that's why I became a pastor, is because you have these people who you were with week in and week out, where you have this opportunity to shape the way they think, ultimately about the religion, but about other things too. So I'm really thankful that you're a teacher, that you're doing what you're doing, and that you're impacting people's lives and doing the thing that I think is most important, which of course is the most important thing, what I think, right? So
yes,
of course, you're right. No, but
I hope you're going to send this to Miss Merrill, because I think she would really appreciate hearing this.
I might throw it over to her and see what goes on. So,
that would make your day.
Jodi, thank you for being here today. I hope that you all enjoyed watching it and listening to our conversation. And I'll be back next week, and we'll be dealing with something a little bit different. So I hope you all have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.